How you doing today, Brian?
Hey, it's been a good day. I started off this morning with a meditation session, and that tends to be how I usually frame myself before I get into work. And so it was especially fortuitous to be joined by a guest today with Mike Lee talking about his own mindfulness practice and as a daily meditator, how that's contributed a lot to his own leadership insights and as well as the business practices that he's engaged in.
Really like this. It's definitely a different guest than we've had in the past. It's more along the line of the mindfulness, self awareness, some of these things that you and I always say they're essential skills. They're not soft skills. It's just things leaders need to know. So our process behind it is, we're trying to expose our audience to a more diverse background, right?
For sure. And all of these things factor into what you more commonly might hear in the mainstream referred to under the umbrella of emotional intelligence, the
Hmm.
self-awareness. Those things don't just show up. If it's something that is in the area of skills that you need some development, some of the mindfulness practices that we heard about today are really, key to helping to hone those skills. And I particularly like how Mike got into some of the physiology of what happens to the
Hmm.
brain as meditation becomes more of a routine practice. And he's worked with some real people who are out there putting these practices to work. Steph Curry, for anyone who's an NBA fan, is a name that is well known. So um, and it's not just basketball that is sort of the central orientation for what Mike Lee's doing, but he's got a long history in it, and being able to bring those techniques to athletes who have mastered their game, it's exciting, and it's a fun sort of alternate path for us to have explored on lead.exe. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Lead.exe. I'm Brian Comerford in Denver, Colorado.
And I'm Nick Lozano in Washington, D.C.
And today we're joined by special guest Mike Lee, who comes to us from Mind Shift Labs, as well as being the author of a book called Untrain and the founder of Thrive, a basketball training company that creates game-changing experiences that cross over from the court to life. So very excited to have a conversation with you today, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Well, it's not very often that we've got someone who's fusing basketball and leadership, but, as with a lot of athletics, leadership tends to be one of those key components to success. So in the process of giving us a little bit about your own background, I know I'm curious to hear more about what led you down the basketball leadership path.
Yeah, really this started with a friend of mine. We were in college. After my sophomore year, we decided we wanted to just run a basketball camp in our hometown of about, at that time, like 12,000 people, just for fun. We wanted to do it and just provide the kids with an experience in town that they couldn't get unless they were going to travel to Milwaukee, to Minneapolis. And even if you went that far, like we kind of created something a little different. And we set up this camp. We did things different. We had some unbelievable high school coaches in the area that ran a lot of the skill development. But we also, one of the things that really separated it, especially in the beginning, was the intensity of it was definitely different. It was not a typical summer camp for kids. This was high level, elite level training applicable to a sixth grader, seventh grader, eighth grader. And the other thing that we did different was we hired a DJ to DJ first camp. So instead of kids just going through drills, they're going through drills with high energy music, filling the gym, and the ability to go over and request songs from the DJ during camp. So that was something that we did that was definitely different. I don't know if anybody's ever done that before. Yeah, the first year we had 100 kids. The second year we decided to do it again, we had 200. And the third year we had over 300 kids in a town of 12,000 people in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. So I kind of knew that this was something that could be bigger, that I could grow, that would be an avenue to reach a lot of kids. And instead of pursuing a path of coaching college basketball, I decided to go down this route of running basketball camps and working out kids individually and in groups that wanted to play at a higher level. So that was kind of how it started. And that just grew into more camps, more training. I've spent time in the gym with at least a couple dozen NBA basketball players, working on their individual skills. I was assistant director for Steph Curry's skills academy that he ran a couple years out of college. Worked out Joel Embiid when he was, before anybody knew who he was. He was pretty much just a kid from Africa that was a tall kid that was kind of an athlete that was at a prep school in Florida. And he ended up living in Milwaukee for a couple months during the summer of 2012, I believe, and spent a couple months working with him. And, we've also done events pretty much, honestly, all across the world. I've done training camps for pro teams in Indonesia, run events in 30 different states across the United States. And we opened a training academy in Barcelona in 2018. So kind of been able to do a lot of stuff, had a ton of amazing experiences, met some amazing people, worked with some of the best basketball players on the planet. And it's been a journey. And then fusing the basketball with the leadership aspect, that's a little bit longer of a story, but basically what happened was I picked up a meditation practice to help me combat the heroin-like withdrawal symptoms of this antidepressant medication that I was on. And it was the only way that I could get off it, because I was just in a state of chronic emotional instability. I'd been on this medication for 14 years. I decided to get off of it. Getting off of it, like I said, was like getting off of heroin. And I would go from laughing to crying to anxiety to depression, all within a couple hours. And the only way that I got through this period in my life was I did a massive amount of yoga and I committed to a daily meditation practice. So what happened was, after a couple months, I realized that all the performance and leadership principles that I had been using to get players to perform at their highest level beyond the basketball skills, and using with the people that I worked with in our little basketball training business, not just me, we've had at different times, 5 to 6 different employees on a consistent basis, that all these principles were amplified. Because when you have a meditation practice, there are areas of your brain that change. There's an area in the front called your neocortex, which is responsible for things like your executive function, your self-awareness. That area actually grows and gets bigger in our brain. There's an area in the back called the amygdala, which is responsible for our fight, flight, or freeze response. And that area actually shrinks when we have a meditation practice, making us less reactive to stress. And then when we are less reactive to stress or chaos or distractions in our environment, we are fully in the present moment, focused on what we actually can control in that situation, whatever the task is. If you're an artist, an athlete, a CEO, everything is about how do I access the present moment, because that's the only place that we can do our greatest work. We can show up as the best version of ourselves for those that we're leading. Mm-hmm. So I realized that instead of building basketball players, I wanted to build people. And that really was the foundation of how Mindshift Labs started. And it's kind of a twofold mission. It's kind of, part one is to help alleviate emotional suffering for as many people as I can for the rest of my life. And the flip side of that is when you can start to do that, you help people along their path of pursuing their human potential. And that's really the exciting part to me, is helping people unlock what's inside of them so that they can have a super fulfilling life going after things that they love and dream about. But then just the process of alone of that growth and that pursuit is unbelievably enjoyable and fulfilling in and of itself. And that applies to anybody who's in a leadership position, anybody who wants to perform at their highest level, whatever industry they're in. These concepts all apply, and it's been super rewarding and fulfilling to go down that journey, hear the impact that it's having on people, and being able to share these with people across the country.
Wow. Well, that's quite an introduction. And I think a lot of what you've said resonates with both Nick and I. I know that Nick's a martial artist, and I myself am a daily meditator. So there's
Amazing.
there's a lot of synergy in our own personal beliefs. With
Are you in Boulder or Denver?
When I moved to Colorado, I lived in Boulder. I came here to go to Boulder originally.
Gotcha.
And was in Boulder for 10 years before making the move to Denver.
Gotcha. Just figured that's a place that's probably got a lot more people who are meditating than in Denver.
I think probably at the time that I came, that was probably true, but I don't know that it's necessarily true now. I think Denver is probably more analogous to, places like Austin, Texas, or San Francisco at this point.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, that's the high level journey.
Nice. I like that you bring self-awareness about, because that's how I actually wound up finding you on LinkedIn. Was you had a comment about I believe it was AI, kind of diminishing some of this technology, and people needing to write lines of code because technology was just going to advance, and those hard skills, and then people always call them soft skills, but I just call them like essential skills. These soft skills like emotional intelligence and everything are really important, and I really liked the message that you had behind that. So what's your thought process behind the self-awareness?
Well, the key to me is awareness is everything.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to perform at a higher level in any arena, awareness is everything. If you don't have awareness, you can't make changes, and without changes, you can't improve. So everything starts with creating that self-awareness. What I found is the more self-aware I've become, the more socially aware I've become, meaning I'm able to be more present with somebody else, hold space for them, and also be able to pick up on their body language, pick up on their tone of voice, pick up on their eye contact, and different things like that, to read how they are, what kind of emotional state that they are in, so you're able to connect with them in a way that makes them feel safe.
I like that, and you're working with leaders of different varieties, and emotional intelligence and meditation, everything is like this squishy, soft, feely, terms. So, like, how do you slowly bring them into, like something like meditation? Because people always, think of that as like you have to be some kind of monk who sits in a corner and says,
Yeah.
like, how are you introducing that, I guess, to people who might be, not quite as open to it initially?
Yeah. The first thing is, it's not for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's a practice that takes a ton of discipline. It's super simple, but that does not mean in any way, shape, or form that it's easy. But going back to your question, I think the way that I like to introduce it to people is a couple ways. Number one, share a story about somebody that they can relate to or aspire to, that has used this practice to elevate their career or their life. And there is a massive amount of people that we're becoming more aware of that in recent years. I mean, in the last 3 to 5 years, but have been using these practices for the past 15, 20 years.
Hmm.
I talk when I speak and run workshops, I tell stories about Kobe Bryant and how this impacted how he showed up on the court. And Kobe was a daily meditator for the last 20 years of his career. I think he started meditating a couple years into his NBA career, and then until he transitioned a few weeks ago. But he was a daily meditation practitioner, and this is what allowed him to play with so much poise, to play with so much calm in the middle of chaos, because he always was aware that he had developed the skill to continually come back to his breath no matter what was going on in the arena. And I think that gave him a huge advantage. You look at the way he played, nobody ever sped him up. Nobody dictated what he did out on the court, because he had always had that awareness to continually come back to his breath because of his mindfulness practice. And so he was able to play alert, but he was also able to play relaxed at the same time. He was relaxed enough that nobody sped him up and forced him to do things that he didn't want to do, but he was also alert enough that if he saw a gap or he saw an option, he was able to take advantage of it because he was fully alert in the moment without being sped up. And I think that translates to so many areas of life. I mean, if you're in a high pressure, fast paced work environment, that skill is invaluable. That is going to dramatically increase your ability to deliver results. If you're even if you are you're a parent and dealing with your kids on a consistent basis that are making demands of you every day, or even if it's your dog, like there's this can show up in so many ways and have an impact on your life. So it's telling stories about their other people that have used these practices for their career to level up their performance. And it's just, again, there's so many people that are using these practices that are it's kind of under the radar. Like most people don't know that Michael Jordan, and this is not a meditation practice, but just something that you're doing, an exercise, a strategy to train your mind. Michael Jordan hired a hypnotist to strengthen his beliefs around his confidence. Nobody knows that. And that was years ago that he found value and knew the importance of training your mind because that's where everything starts. Everything starts with what we think about. And so he knew that. The other thing is to give them a direct experience. Mindfulness meditation practice is not something that you can explain to somebody. You can to a certain extent, but it's something that they have to have a direct experience with to actually fully understand it. It's like you can read a book about how to swim, but you really don't know what it's like until you jump in the water.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the way I like to introduce it to people is give them a story, give them a direct experience, and then let them decide for themselves whether or not it's something that they think will have an impact on their life. I mean, a lot of people start out and they are what we call crisis meditators. They only meditate when things are going crazy in their life. And that's how I started. Mm-hmm. I was insanely stressed out from building this nonprofit for inner city at-risk kids in Milwaukee, trying to keep my basketball business going in an unhealthy relationship. And working out wasn't cutting it anymore. I needed something different to train my mind. And I would stop and I'd go out on my balcony in Milwaukee, and I would sit there 20, 30 minutes with an app called Headspace. And this was almost 6 years ago. But that's how I started. I was definitely 100% a crisis meditator. So I think it's something that people need to, if it's with the awareness we have today around the practices, I really think that it's something that if it's going to be beneficial for you in your life, you're going to find it and it's going to come to you, and it's going to be what you need, or it's not going to be what you need. But I definitely think there are a lot of myths and challenges around it that deter people from even starting in the first place, or they try it a couple times and they have this misconception about what the experience is supposed to be, so they stop the practice.
Well, I think that's all of those are I think key points. The crisis meditator comment, it tends to be an entry point for a lot of people into more healthful practices, right?
Right.
I did some work with a health and wellness group who
Okay.
was going into organizations, doing typical things like health screenings, right? Making sure that on an annual basis you're getting your blood pressure checked and your BMI and all of these different things. But I worked with that group and I actually taught them meditation practice. And so this became one of those freebies that got introduced with some of the organizations where it's we're just going to do 10 minutes of this, and we'll walk through a couple different approaches and how it's done, including a walking meditation, a sitting meditation, right? And really just being able to learn, number one, it's called practice for a reason, because
Right.
ultimately for people who are regular practitioners of meditation, that there's really never any mastery, right?
Right.
There's always room for improvement in whatever your practice is, but being able to discipline the mind and get yourself to a place where you have greater control over the reactions, where your mind tends to want to fire up the chatterbox again, and in particular, being kind to yourself as you're having that recognition. Oh, there it is, thinking
Right.
again, right? Let's dismiss that and go back to the breath. Those I think are key components that can help start driving this more towards, like what you're saying. How do you bake it into introducing it as something that, uh, rather than ever becoming a crisis meditator, it's something that we're introducing into Western society in particular as something with all these great benefits, so that you don't have to come to it when you're in a point of crisis.
Right. Right. I agree.
So, I would say another anecdote that I can share, one that was meaningful to me and kind of connected with part of the story you were sharing, as you were referring to, what are some of those personal stories that, can help sort of reframe the perspective of who you're trying to introduce to this. I worked with the president of a software company who I was surprised to discover was a Buddhist. And, originally I'd, been there working as a contractor, and I asked him, you're working with some pretty archaic code. I was coding at the time, but I was kind of surprised with the code base. And I said, how do you kind of manage, navigating through all this stuff? Cause it looks, like a much more cumbersome process than what I'm used to working in. And he said, Zen archery. And I said, okay, I don't know what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
he said, no, every weekend, I spend about an hour each day practicing Zen archery. And
Yeah.
I had no idea what that meant. And so on one of these weekends, he took me out to a place and showed me. And it was really about not only the breath control,
Yeah.
um, but being able to get yourself into a place where you were kind of like your basketball, story with Kobe Bryant, maintaining that poise and grace. How do you maintain the tension that's required working with a bow and arrow, and also maintain perfect poise and grace, concentration, and breath control?
100%. 100%. There's that balance there, and that's one of my yoga teachers when I first started said, she talked about 70% effort or 80% effort. And this is, I guess, is jumping into basketball a little bit, but like so many coaches, and I'm guessing this is like this in other sports as well, but they preach so much game speed training all the time that what that translates to a lot of players or kids is that you should go at 100% full speed all the time with
Mhm.
full effort. And you can't play the game like that. And you can't play life like that. And I 100% agree. That's like finding the middle way, right? It's
Hmm.
the that 70% effort, 80% effort. Meditation is not, I think this is one of the myths about it is that, oh, it's going to take away my edge and it's going to make me soft and I'm not going to be as motivated. Kobe Bryant was the ultimate competitor. And you can't say that this meditation softened him up from his competitive edge in any way, shape, or form. So it, I don't think, but I think finding that, and Kobe is a great example of that. I don't know exactly how you described it, but being able to hold that tension that is needed in the moment to perform with the physical skill, but also have that softness of your breath and that awareness and being able to still be fully in the present moment. So yeah, I've never done that before, but I can imagine that's a great practice.
Well, when you come back to Colorado, I'll take you up to the Shambhala Mountain Center. There's a Zen archery range up there.
Sounds awesome.
And I'll tell you what, anyone who thinks that meditation will soften you up needs to sit with a straight back on a brick floor for an hour.
That's true. That's true.
So just had
So,
a question for you here,
Yeah.
getting back to your kind of leadership.
Yes.
I saw an article on your website. It's like the 10 pillars of transformational leadership,
Yes.
and one of the pillars that really interested me was vulnerability.
Yep.
To me, that's always a key thing when you're a leader is being vulnerable, letting people know that you make mistakes. Like I often, when I have people new that are working with me, I often tell them about all the stuff that I've messed up. Like when I deleted a whole production database of users, so people can't log into a website. Tripping over, a network cable and taking the whole office internet down for like a half an hour. um, so, so anyone who works in technology who tells you that they haven't messed something up is lying to you. um,
Yeah.
but I was just curious what your thoughts on vulnerability are.
Well, it's tough because I think it's becoming a buzzword in society and, across every industry, not every industry, but from just regular life to the corporate space, everything. It's becoming a buzzword. And what I see the challenge with it is that being vulnerable doesn't mean using other people as your therapist. To me, it's yes, you want to be vulnerable, but only when it adds value. If you're vulnerable and just spewing your problems out to somebody, that's not necessarily vulnerability. That's called going to therapy. You so it's when you can share maybe a mistake that you made or it's a mistake you made and there's a teaching point around that or a story where you made a mistake and there's something to be taught, something that can maybe prevent something else within your organization. That's part of it. The other part of it is simply just asking for help when you need it and trusting that you're going to be supported. I think that's the other aspect of it, because the other piece of it is that vulnerability is the first step to creating connection with somebody. And when you create that connection, you can build trust. And then when you have that trust, that's when you can challenge somebody to be at their best. Without that vulnerability is almost a gateway to the ability to influence somebody else in a positive way in a relationship when you're in a leadership position.
It's vulnerability. Like I said, I always use that to open up to people to let them know, like, hey, I've made mistakes, and I'm not expecting you to be perfect.
Right.
Um, it's okay to make mistakes because I feel like sometimes in failure, that's where the growth is too. So that's generally why I kind of do the fail fest portion of that.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And to your point, there's another piece of it that's super important, and that's to make people feel safe enough to make mistakes.
Mhm.
You know, in our world, innovation and creativity are at a premium. We need things to advance with climate change and so many different things in our world, that we need people to be innovative, and we need people to create, and we need people to solve problems. But if you're a leader and you're not making people feel safe enough to make mistakes, that progress is not going to be made. When people feel psychologically safe, you also then have the ability to raise their standards at the same time. And that those two balances, when somebody feels safe yet they also know that great work is needed from them, that's when they can have the freedom to try new things, to take risks, to make mistakes and learn from them, not feeling like they're going to be reprimanded for every little mistake that they make, and even fear of losing their jobs. That freedom is what creates that sense of accountability and responsibility. And when we have that sense of responsibility and accountability, we feel empowered to do our greatest work. And that starts with feeling safe.
That's very very well said, and it almost goes back to your point of trust, right? You're slowly building trust and authenticity in the people that you're leading.
100%. 100%. And vulnerability is a way to speed that up.
Mhm. I completely agree, and that's why I always tend to do it.
So, Mike, tell us a little bit how this factors into your book, Untrain.
The vulnerability aspect, or everything that we're speaking about?
Well, we can start with vulnerability and we can broaden it from there.
Yeah, I mean, the book really, there's a chapter about vulnerability in the book, but there's really, the book is about kind of going back to what I talked about earlier when I picked up this meditation practice, was that it's really about principles of leadership, principles of performance, and how a mindfulness practice can enhance these principles. Like we have all these skills that we know are beneficial to being a great leader, to being a high performer, to delivering world class performance, like focus, like our self awareness, like the ability to place our attention into the present moment. And all of those skills are enhanced, they're amplified when you have a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice. So that was really the premise of the book. Was I I wrote it really because I wanted at the time to get these principles out into the basketball space, the
Mhm.
coaching, really the coaching world, and for players. And then my plan was to go and speak on this in schools. And over the course of a couple of years, I realized that, and all my contacts were at the time in the Midwest and mainly in Wisconsin, and
Mhm.
nobody wanted anything to do with somebody coming in and speaking about mindfulness. It was just kind of a foreign language still. It has definitely changed over the past. I wrote this book almost 5 years ago.
Mhm.
So it's definitely fast tracked and changed. I mean, the conversations that are being had, especially on LinkedIn, with some of the people that I've met
Oh, yeah.
from Milwaukee and from Wisconsin area, that's just, people are so much more open about it. I think because there's research, there's tons of statistics around it, and honestly, like, people are suffering, and when you get to that breaking point, you will try anything to feel better. And that's definitely, I mean, the yoga studio that I used to go to in Milwaukee before I left has grown exponentially. When I go back, the classes are packed. I mean, they're absolutely packed. And when I was going there, it wasn't like that. It was probably 30%, 40% of what it was. And I think that's just because, we're living in this rapidly changing, uncertain, fast-paced world, and people need a way to disconnect, to learn how to work with their mind, learn how to work with their chaos, and be able to find that place within them that's always at peace, it's always at rest, that's never changing, and using your breath as a way to continually come back to that place whenever you get knocked out of the present moment or in a place of high stress or chaos.
Oh yeah, there's I think how much of this has been brought into the mainstream in recent years. You can attribute it in part to the Oprah effect or the Dr. Oz effect or
Yeah, yeah,
the Ellen effect, but you end up having more and more practitioners who are part of a conversation. It was probably just maybe a year ago or 6 months ago. I ended up reading 4 books in a row, and I read one by Sir John Hargrave, I read one by Jen Sincero, one by Deepak Chopra, one by Grace Smith, and in every single book, they're all saying the same thing. All of them are working on some kind of personal and professional development. And every one of them is saying, at the core of this, you've got to have a daily meditation practice. So it's interesting, how that theme has continued to come back and for me personally validate, some of the things that are already part of my individual focus. Um,
right.
but I wanted to ask you, when we hear the term mindfulness, beyond
Yeah.
meditation, what are some of the things that connotates for you or that you share with others?
Well, I describe it in a few ways. Mindfulness to me is the ability or the skill to create the awareness of your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions in the present moment. Meditation is simply an exercise to train your brain to create that awareness. And then the second layer of that a lot of people are starting to implement is the emotional intelligence piece. And you can dive into that in a lot of different ways, but at the core, I think it's figuring out what is driving my thoughts, what is driving my feelings, what is driving my actions, and that's the emotional intelligence piece of the how they play off of each other from mindfulness and emotional intelligence, and that's the way I describe it to people. And then meditation is just it's an exercise. It's just an exercise to train your brain, just like you would go to the gym and run on a treadmill or lift weights, and
Yep.
you start a lifting program, you see physical evidence of change in your body, like your muscles break down, they grow back stronger, and they get bigger, and you see physical evidence of change. And when you have a meditation practice, the same thing is happening in your brain. And so I just try to explain it to people, take that woo woo stuff out of it and just try to get them to understand that this is just simply training your brain. It's a workout for your brain.
No, I really like that. And you go back to you. I'm gonna go back to you said you've worked with the like younger kids,
Mm-hmm.
in high school and middle school and stuff when you first got started,
Yeah.
and lately we always hear this stuff. The millennials have been the punching bag, I guess, for the
Yeah.
past 20 years, and now it's starting to be Gen Z, right? They're starting to come
Right.
up, and they're starting to be, the punching the punching bag a little bit. But so in working with the younger generations, what are you seeing? Are they being more open to this mindfulness, self awareness training that we've kind of seen in the past? I mean, I know some social media and having more access to it with the internet has made it more easily to get the information instead of reading books.
Right.
What did you just see from the time you started to like now?
I love the millennial generation. Like, I mean, I'm at the very top of it, but I love that they're, as a whole, I feel like they're just so much more aware of what's going on in the world. No offense, Brian. But,
I'm at the
uh,
very tip as well too, but
yeah.
Hey, man, everything that the millennials can claim credit for, Gen X could do a decade before.
but they just, they want purpose in their work. They want to do meaningful things in the world. They're more self-aware. They want to make an impact. And so, and I think they also demand transparency, and with that comes kind of figuring out why so many of these things in our world are not working, and they want different solutions. They want different answers. And so where I'm going with that is they have been super open to
Hmm.
mindfulness. It was kind of crazy because when I first set aside time in an event that I was running, a camp that I was running to teach this, I shouldn't say I was kind of hesitant. I was really hesitant to do it because I just had no idea how they were going to react. I think it was actually in Moorhead, Minnesota, is where the
Hmm.
first time that I ever introduced it. And the response that I got from the kids was unbelievable. It was A, when are we going to do this again? B, can we do it longer? C, that was one of the coolest things I've ever done in my life. It was shocking to me what the response was. And I think part of that is because they've grown up in a world that's always on.
Hmm.
And they've grown up in a world that's always on from a technological standpoint, but they've also grown up in a world where 99% of parents plan way too much stuff for their kids and have to have them on a schedule doing something every 15 minutes from the time they get out of bed to the time that they go to bed. And that can drain you. It can be so overwhelming for a kid. There's no time for them to play. There's no time for them to be creative. There's no time for them to just daydream and wonder and let their mind wander and try new things and be in that place of discovery. And so carving out the time for meditation and telling them that they essentially have the permission to do nothing for the next 10 minutes and just be there is something that they've never experienced before. And
Hmm.
so they've been super open to it. I mean, some of the kids, a kid that I have worked with since he's been in seventh grade, I don't do any basketball stuff really with him anymore, but we have more so of a friendship slash mentorship relationship. He plays for the Toronto Raptors now. I got him to start practicing yoga back when he was a sophomore in college, about 5 years ago, and it's had a huge impact. I mean, he tells me all the time. He's like, when I'm consistently doing this stuff, I definitely feel the difference in my performance. And so they're just open to so much more stuff, and I love that about that generation.
That's great. I'm an old rave generation kid. So, and my father was an author of metaphysical literature, and
Wow.
there came a point where he and I were having a discussion. I was working on the introduction to one of his books, and in it, I told him, a lot of what you're describing about sort of this emergent, new society is really, part of a characteristic that in rave subculture we used to call plur. I don't know if you've ever heard that
Okay.
before, but plur,
No.
PLUR, peace, love, unity, respect. And
Okay.
that was like the axiom by which the subculture operated under. And we were
Yeah.
all wired, I mean, we were using social media before anyone referred to it as social media. We were all web heads and, coders. And so, part of what I shared with my father was a lot of these ideas that for him kind of didn't exist until the socio-sexual psychedelic revolution of the 1960s in the West, right?
Yeah.
That was kind of the turning point. Um, the whole point that I was trying to stress with him is this is actually now just foundational for people. So younger people are already operating from a position where, some of these ideas that for a man in his 80s were, still forward thinking. It's actually kind of looking back. It's sort of it's almost like looking into the past. For
Right.
a lot of the emergent generation. So part of what I feel like I'm hearing from you is reinforcement of that idea that there is more of a native openness to the emerging generations.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I
So is there
agree.
so just gonna ask you a question that we always ask all of our guests. Is there any
Yeah.
books or piece of media or HBO article or something or whatever that's had a big impact on you?
So many. So many. I think, one thing that a lot of people want mentors all the time. They want somebody to mentor them, to learn from them. And with the access that we have today, you can find a mentor in anything
Mhm.
that you want. And so one way that I like to kind of do this through books. And I mean, I can't pinpoint one book that has had a massive impact on me. One of them, I'll give you a couple. One is Leading an Inspired Life by a guy named Jim Rohn.
Oh, yep.
Uh,
No
he,
Jim Rohn.
he-
Yep.
yeah, okay,
Mhm.
awesome. He, for those of you who don't know, he was Tony Robbins' first mentor, and a lot of Tony's philosophies come from Jim Rohn. His life philosophies come from Jim. He's got some incredible, timeless books. I actually just reread that book a couple months ago. That was awesome. The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and the other book that he wrote, The Surrender Experiment.
Mhm.
Both of those unbelievable books that have had a big impact on my life. And trying to think of anything else that's really, those two are really at the top of the list. There's so many more that have had an impact. Course in Miracles
Mhm.
has been an amazing book, workbook to study. That's had an impact as well.
And that's a pretty light tome too. You can just kind of breeze through that like on the subway.
Oh I've been reading it for I've had it for 3 years, and I think I'm or 3 or 4 years, and I'm close to being halfway done. I think I'm like page 460 something. You know, reading a page in there is like reading 50 pages of another book. It's
Yeah.
pretty heavy stuff. But what I've learned is to try to just read it, not try to think about what in the world was he talking about, and just kind of let that sink into your subconscious and just kind of go along the way and try to keep going with it. But that's also had an impact for sure.
That's really interesting.
I mean, that's the way I like to read. I don't read a ton of books quite as much anymore. I used to be a guy who could read like 20 books a year, but now I pare it down to like I might pick 4 books and then take notes
Yeah.
and then go through my notes, then look on YouTube for somebody else's review of the book, just so I can
Hmm.
see somebody else's viewpoint on what they read or what they heard.
Yeah.
Um, and then I go back and decide what I want to implement and what I want to take out of it. It's just a different approach I've taken, and I've done that with some long books where it took me like over a year to read it.
Right. I wish I did more of that. I have way too many items highlighted and underlined that have never had any action taken on them. So I wish I was more in your boat. But the other thing with that is I think we'll take action on the things that we need to at that
Mhm.
point in our life.
Sure.
But I definitely wish I leaned a little bit more your way, Nick.
Hey, I've only recently started doing it, maybe the past couple of years, so I'm just as guilty as everybody else of, picking up some leadership book, saying, "Oh, this stuff's all great," and then going on to the next book and completely forgetting everything that I just read.
Right.
There's so much content out there, so much good stuff. So,
There is. There really is.
so if people are looking for you on the internet, want to check out your coaching information, where can they find you?
The two places I've been hanging out the most have been LinkedIn and Instagram, both at Who is Mike Lee. There was 9 million other Mike Lees, so that was the best that I could come up with. Also, you check out the website at mindshiftlabs.com. Would love to connect with anybody, answer any questions that you have, and help in any way that I possibly can.
And we'll definitely be sure to link all that in our show notes, well as your link and the link to your book as well too.
Amazing.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. It's probably, you weren't thinking you were going to be a guest on a podcast about leadership and technology probably a week ago. So,
It's all right. I had a great time.
Yeah, no, we're good. We're happy
oh,
to
we did
happy
too.
to have you. And leadership is just leadership in general. It doesn't matter where it is. That's my opinion. But
No, it's great. Every principle that we've discussed today, I think, is valuable to a leader at any level in any field. So, really appreciate your insights. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you a little bit. Thanks for coming on the show.
appreciate
You
it.
bet.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for having me, guys.